Welcome to Inside WWII, your essential source for in-depth World War II history. We go beyond the timelines to explore the untold stories, key strategies, and personal accounts that shaped the greatest global conflict. If you're looking for high-quality, historically accurate content that truly brings the past to life, subscribe now and join us for the full story. How Patton's all-black Tank Battalion took the fight to the Nazis. General George S. Patton's Black Panthers was the first all-black tank unit to see combat, fighting racial stereotypes both at home and on the battlefield. With the blessing of General George S. Patton, the 761st Tank Battalion, also known as the Black Panthers, became the first all-black tank unit to see combat during World War II. The 761st Black Panther Tank Battalion was the first African-American armored unit to see combat. Before and during mobilization for World War II, officials in Washington, D.C. debated whether or not African-American soldiers should be used in armored units. Many military men and politicians believed that blacks did not have the brains, quickness, or moral stamina to fight in a war. Referring to his World War I experiences, Colonel James A. Moss, commander of the 367th Infantry Regiment 92nd Division, stated, "As fighting troops, the Negro must be rated as second-class material, this primarily to his inferior intelligence and lack of mental and moral qualities." Colonel Perry L. Miles, commander of the 371st Infantry Regiment, 93rd Division, voiced a similar opinion. In a future war, the main use of the Negro should be in labor organizations. General George S. Patton Jr., in a letter to his wife, wrote that a colored soldier cannot think fast enough to fight in armor. The armed forces embraced these beliefs even though African Americans had fought with courage and distinction in the Revolutionary War and every other war ever waged by the United States. These commanders overlooked the fact that during World War I, 4 regiments of the 93rd Division had served with the French. Their valiant efforts were recognized by the French government, who awarded the coveted Croix de Guerre to 3 of the 4 regiments and to a company of the 4th, as well as to the 1st Battalion 367th Infantry Regiment 92nd Division. Lieutenant General Leslie J. McMaher, Chief of the U.S. Army Ground Forces, was the main reason African Americans were allowed to serve in armored units. He believed his nation could ill afford to exclude such a potentially important source of manpower. The Black Press, the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People, and the Congress of Racial Equality also placed increasing pressure on the War Department and President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration to allow black soldiers to serve on an equal footing with white soldiers. In summer of 1940, Congress passed into law the Selective Training and Service Act, which said, "In the selection and training of men under this act, there shall be no discrimination against any person on account of race and color." In October, however, the White House issued a statement saying that while the services of Negroes would be utilized on a fair and equitable basis, the policy of segregation in the armed forces would continue. In March 1941, almost 100 black enlisted men reported to Fort Knox, Kentucky from Fort Custer, Michigan for armored warfare training with the 758th Tank Battalion, Light. The pioneer black tankers trained in light tank operations, mechanics, and related phases of mechanized warfare as enlisted men from other Army units joined their ranks. The M5 light tank carried a crew of 4. Powered by twin Cadillac engines, it could reach a maximum speed of 40 miles per hour and had an open-road cruising range of 172 miles. It was armed with a .30 caliber machine gun mounted to fire along the same axis as the tank's main armament, a 37mm cannon. When the tracer bullets from the .30 registered on a target, the cannon would be fired, hopefully scoring a direct hit.
The M5 was also armed with 2 more .30 caliber machine guns, one on the turret and one in the bow. The light tank was employed to provide fire support, mobility, and crew protection in screening and reconnaissance missions. The 5th Tank Group, commanded by Colonel Leroy Nichols, was to be made up of black enlisted personnel and white officers. With the 751st Tank Battalion in place, 2 more tank battalions were needed to complete the 5th Tank Group. On March 15, 1942, the War Department ordered the activation of the 761st Tank Battalion, Light, at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, with an authorized strength of 36 officers and 593 enlisted men. The final battalion, the 784th, would be activated on April 1, 1943. On September 15, 1943, the 761st Battalion moved to Camp Hood, Texas, for advanced training. There they changed from light to medium tanks. On July 6, 1944, one of the 761st's few black officers, Lieutenant Jackie Robinson, was riding a civilian bus from Camp Hood to the nearby town of Belton. He refused to move to the back of the bus when told to do so by the driver. Court-martial charges ensued, but could not proceed because the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Paul L. Bates, would not consent to the charges. The top brass at Camp Hood then transferred Robinson to the 758th Tank Battalion, whose commander immediately signed the court-martial consent. The lieutenant's trial opened on August 2nd and lasted for 17 days, during which time the 761st departed Camp Hood. Robinson was charged with violating the 63rd and 64th Articles of War. The first charge specified, Lieutenant Robertson behaved with disrespect toward Captain Gerald Bear, Corps Military Police, by contemptuously bowing to him and giving several sloppy salutes while repeating, "Okay, sir," in an insolent, impertinent, and rude manner. The second charge stipulated, Lieutenant Robertson having received a lawful command by Captain Bear to remain in a receiving room at the MP station, disobeyed such order. Robinson was eventually acquitted, and he was not charged for his actions on the bus. 3 years later, Robinson was riding buses in the major leagues after breaking baseball's color barrier. In October 1944, after 2 years of intense armored training, the 761st Tank Battalion, known as the Black Panthers, landed in France. The tankers received a welcome from the 3rd Army commander, Lieutenant General George S. Patton Jr., who had observed the 761st conducting training maneuvers in the States. "Men, you're the first Negro tankers to ever fight in the American Army. I would never have asked for you if you weren't good. I have nothing but the best in my army. I don't care what color you are as long as you go up there and kill those Kraut sons of bitches. Everyone has their eyes on you and is expecting great things from you. Most of all, your race is looking forward to you. Don't let them down, and damn you, don't let me down." On November 8th, the Black Panthers became the first African-American armored unit to enter combat, smashing into the towns of Moyenvic and Vic-sur-Selle. During the attack, Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers in Able Company's lead tank encountered a roadblock that held up the advance. With utter disregard for his personal safety, he courageously climbed out of his tank under direct enemy fire, attached a cable to the roadblock, and removed it. His prompt action prevented a serious delay in the offensive and was instrumental in the success of the attack. On November 10th, Sergeant Warren G.H. Creasy fought through enemy positions to aid his men until his tank was destroyed. He immediately took command of another vehicle, armed only with a .30 caliber machine gun, and liquidated the enemy position that had destroyed his tank. Still under heavy fire, he helped eliminate the enemy forward observers who were directing the artillery fire that had been pinning down the American infantry.
The next day, Creasy's tank became bogged down in the mud. He dismounted and fearlessly faced anti-tank, artillery, and machine gun fire as he extricated his tank.
While freeing his tank, he saw that the accompanying infantry was pinned down and that the enemy had begun a counterattack. Creasy climbed up on the rear of his immobilized tank and held off the Germans with his .50 caliber machine gun while the foot soldiers withdrew. Later that day, he again exposed himself to enemy fire as he wiped out several machine gun nests and an anti-tank position with only his machine gun. The more fire he drew, the harder he fought. After the battle, Creasy had to be pried away from his machine gun. Trisvant Anderson said of Sergeant Creasy, "To look at Warren G. Creasy, the GH stands for Gamaliel Harding, you'd never think that here was a killer who had slain more of the enemy than any man in the 751st. He extracted a toll of lives from the enemy that would have formed the composition of 3 or 4 companies with his machine guns alone. And yet he is such a quiet, easygoing, meek-looking fellow that you'd think that the fuzz which a youngster tries to cultivate for a mustache would never grow on his baby-skinned chin, and that he'd never use a word stronger than damn. But here was a youth who went so primitively savage on the battlefield that his only thought was to kill, 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 and he poured his rain of death pellets into German bodies with so much reckless abandon and joy that he was the nemesis of all the foes of the 751st. And other men craved to ride with Creasy and share the reckless thrill of killing the hated enemy that had killed their comrades. And he is now living on borrowed time. By all human equations, Warren G.H. Creasy should have been dead long ago and should have had the Congressional Medal of Honor, at least. The Black Panthers pushed on. It was rough going through the rain, mud, cold, and driving sleet, fighting an enemy who bitterly contested every inch of ground. The 751st smashed through the French towns of Aubrec, Dédaline, and Châteauvieux, with Rivers leading the way for Able Company. Rivers, a tank platoon sergeant, became adept at liquidating the enemy with his .50 caliber machine gun. The dashing young fighter from Oklahoma was soon a legend in the battalion. One lieutenant recalled telling Rivers via radio, "Don't go into that town, Sergeant, it's too hot in there." Rivers respectfully replied, "I'm sorry, sir, I'm already through that town." On the way to Gebling, France, on November 16, 1944, Rivers's tank ran over a Teller anti-tank mine. The explosion blew off the right track, the volute springs, and the undercarriage, hurling the tank sideways. When the medical team arrived, they found Rivers behind his tank holding one leg, which was ripped to the bone. There was a hole in his leg where part of his knee had been, and bone protruded through his trousers. The medics cleansed and dressed the wound and attempted to inject Rivers with morphine, but he refused. He wanted to remain alert. The medics informed Rivers' commanding officer, Captain David J. Williams II, that Rivers should be evacuated immediately. Rivers refused. Pulling himself to his feet, he pushed past the captain and took over a second tank. At that moment, a hail of enemy fire came in. The captain gave orders to disperse and take cover. The 751st was to cross a river into Gebling after combat engineers constructed a Bailey Bridge. The Germans tried desperately to stop the construction, but the Black Panthers held them off. The bridge was completed on the afternoon of November 17th. Rivers led the way across, and the Black Panthers took up positions in and around Gebling. On the way into town, Rivers, despite his wounds, engaged 2 German tanks and disabled them both. Still in great pain, he took on 2 more tanks and forced them to withdraw. The Black Panthers spent that evening in continuous combat. Before dawn on November 18, 1944, the captain and the medical team visited each tank. When they reached Rivers, it was obvious that he was in extreme pain. Rivers' leg was re-examined and found to be infected. The medical team said that if he was not evacuated immediately, the leg would have to be amputated. Rivers still insisted that he would not abandon his men. Throughout the day, both sides held and defended their positions. At dawn on November 19th, the 751st began an assault on the village of Bogaltroff. When the Black Panthers emerged from cover, the morning air outside Gebling lit up with tracers from enemy guns. Rivers spotted the anti-tank guns and directed a concentrated barrage on them, allowing his trapped comrades to escape with their lives. Rivers continued to fire until several tracers were seen going into his turret. From a comparatively close range of 200 yards, the Germans threw in 2 HE, high-explosive shots that scored. The first shot hit near the front of the tank and penetrated with ricocheting fragments confined inside its steel walls. The second scored inside. The first shot had blown Rivers's brains against the back of the tank, and the second went into his head, emerging from the rear. And the intrepid leader, the fearless, daring fighter, was no more. Ruben Rivers did not have to die on that cold, dreary November morning in France. 3 days earlier, he had received what GIs called a $1 million wound. He could have been evacuated to the rear and gone home a war hero with his Silver Star and Purple Heart, knowing that the Black Panthers loved him and respected him as an outstanding soldier and comrade. But he stayed, and he died. The Black Panthers pushed on. From December 31, 1944 to February 2, 1944, the 751st Tank Battalion took part in the American counteroffensive following the Battle of the Bulge. In a major battle at Tillé, Belgium, the 751st operated for 2 continuous days against German panzer and infantry units, who withdrew in the face of the Black Panthers' attack. The operations of the 751st in the Bulge split the enemy lines at 3 points: the Uffalize-Bastogne Road, the Estwitz-Bastogne Highway, and the Estwitz-Trier Road, preventing the resupply of German forces encircling American troops at Bastogne. Later, as the armored spearhead for the 103rd Infantry Division, the 751st took part in assaults that resulted in the breach of the Siegfried Line. From March 20th to 23rd, 1945, operating far in advance of friendly artillery and in the face of vicious German resistance, elements of the 751st attacked and destroyed many defensive positions along the Siegfried Line. The 751st captured 7 German towns, more than 400 vehicles, 80 heavy weapons, 200 horses, and thousands of individual and crew-served weapons. This was accomplished in spite of extremely adverse weather conditions, difficult terrain not suited to armor, heavily fortified enemy positions, extreme shortages of replacement personnel and equipment, an overall casualty rate approaching 50%, and the loss of 71 tanks. In 1978, 35 years after the end of World War II, the 751st Tank Battalion received a Presidential Unit Citation. In 1997, 53 years after giving his life on the battlefield, Sergeant Ruben Rivers was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. The motto of the 751st Tank Battalion has always been, "Come out fighting." In World War II, that is exactly what the Black Panthers did.